the hell is going on?
What's really going on?
We said, what the hell happened?
You don't have to know what the hell is on it.
They see what's going on.
I don't know what's going on. What is going on?
We must find out what is going on.
Hi, I'm Danielle Pletka.
I'm Mark Thiessen.
Welcome to our podcast, What the Hell is Going On? So, Mark, what the hell is going on?
So what the hell is going on is that Dany has finally left the Southern Hemisphere, but she has only made her way partly back to the United States because she is in Taipei, Taiwan, where she has been observing the historic Taiwanese presidential elections. These elections were something spectacular, and China wasn't happy with the results, were they, Dany?
Oh, no. So, China claims Taiwan, which is the Republic of China, as a province of the People's Republic. They don't like democratic elections going on here any more than they like people demanding their democratic rights in Hong Kong. And so when Taiwan votes, it's just a slap in the face to the People's Republic. And when millions and millions of people come out to vote for the candidate who is much tougher on China, and she wins in a landslide victory, 20 points ahead of her opponent, who was more pro-China, that's even worse news for Beijing. So it was a pretty exciting election here.
You know, it's funny because the Chinese obviously don't like the result, but there's probably nobody more responsible for the result than the People's Republic of China. President Tsai was considered almost out of the running a year ago. She was a political dead woman walking. And then all of a sudden the Hong Kong protests start and China cracks down on the protesters. And people in Taiwan said, oh, that's what you mean by one country, two systems. No, thank you.
Yeah, she was, as you rightly said, dead man walking, dead woman walking a year ago. But Hong Kong has totally changed things around. And the Chinese government, for reasons that still are a little unclear to me, has mismanaged Hong Kong so badly. And you and I have talked about this repeatedly on the podcast, has mismanaged this so badly that they sent a message to every single one of their neighbors and to the people of Taiwan that, if we have what's called one country, two systems, what that really means is one country, one system under the Communist Party in Beijing. Your freedoms are gone, your rights are gone. Riot police will be in the streets trying to take you away. Your political opponents will be spirited away and disappeared into Chinese prisons. And the Taiwanese people, who have a very prosperous democracy, turned around and said, gee, no thank you.
I just don't understand China's approach to all of this because Hong Kong is the golden goose, right? All they have to do is leave the place alone, let it function under the one country, two systems deal that they had, give it the autonomy that they promised, and keep reaping the benefits. And instead, they launched this horrific crackdown on protesters that not only has roiled Hong Kong and put it in jeopardy, but has completely undermined its objective of wooing Taiwan back to the mainland. They've been under the KMT, which is the nationalist party that preceded President Tsai's party. They forged economic cooperation agreements with Taiwan. They were trying to bring them closer. They were giving them opportunities for businesses to invest, special visas for people to come over, money pouring in, Chinese tourists going over. And by the crackdown in Hong Kong, they've completely undone all the progress that they had made from their perspective in sort of wooing Taiwan back into the fold of the motherland.
Well, wooing is really not the Chinese approach to anything. And I think that's part of the challenge, is that Xi Jinping, who is the Chinese president, is aggressive. He's a throwback to the earlier, less open, less capitalistic, less free China. And all of China's neighbors are noticed. You make fun of me for having been in Australia, but in Australia, what you see is this major turnaround in attitudes. China is a hugely important trading partner to almost everybody, like it is to the United States. And nonetheless, what you see in Australia is that Xi Jinping and his aggressive habits, their attempts to interfere in Australian democracy, their attempts to use ethnic Chinese to promote the Communist Party agenda, is really backfiring everywhere. And the same was true here. And so, here was this woman, Tsai Ing-wen, who leads the Democratic Progressive Party, and she was assumed to lose. And not only did she win, she won with more votes than have ever been cast. People have mischaracterized what happened. She won. She got 8.2 million votes. There weren't 8.2 million votes cast. She got 8.2 million votes. This is a country of about 24 million people. I mean, when you think about that kind of turnout and that kind of vote, that was intended to be a slap in the face to Beijing. It has been a slap in the face to Beijing. And Beijing so doesn't get it that people who congratulated Tsai Ing-wen on her victory, including, the United States government, were rebuked the day after by Beijing. I mean, what the hell?
That's a very good question. It's one we try to answer on this podcast every day. So here's the question. What the hell does Beijing do now? Because this is the million-dollar question. Because if they were capable of some introspection, they would say, boy, we really screwed up here. The Nationalist Party, which is considered more pro-Beijing, was cruising to re-election until we cracked down in Hong Kong. And now all of a sudden we have created this wave of anti-China sentiment in Taiwan that led to Tsai's improbable re-election. So what should we do now? Well, let's use economic coercion to squeeze them now. So let's do that. That'll be a really great idea. Oh no, that might push Taiwan to have a free trade agreement with the United States, to become more economically independent of China, which means it'll be more de facto truly independent. Or maybe we should threaten them with military action. Well, that might also backfire in other ways. So what do you see Beijing doing now, and can we expect them to continue to shoot themselves in the foot?
So it's funny, our colleague Oriana Mastro had a piece after Tsai's victory in the paper, and she said she spends a lot of time in China talking to the military. She said she's really worried that the Chinese are going to contemplate military action. They seem less worried about that here. They seem to think that the Chinese are not going to move in that direction. They're going to continue to threaten them. They're going to continue to try to bully Taiwan, but that they're not ready for the consequences of an invasion. President Trump reversed U.S. policy. The Obama administration didn't have a very enthusiastic program of arms sales to Taiwan. And frankly, the Bush administration promised a lot to Taiwan and didn't deliver. The Trump administration has delivered a lot of advanced weaponry to Taipei. And so they're hoping that will be a deterrent to China. And I think that they think the world is watching. I hope they're right. But the one thing that we haven't seen is any sort of rethink coming out of Beijing. They're not saying to themselves, maybe honey's a little better than vinegar. And I think that can all be put down to Xi Jinping. He doesn't know how to do it.
It's funny. I read Oriana's article, and I commend it to everybody. It's in the Los Angeles Times, and it's titled, "Why Tsai Wins Re-Election as President Could Darken Taiwan's Future." I don't think she means it in the sense that the democratic elections will darken Taiwan's future, but that they're sending a message to China that there's never going to be peaceful reunification, and that the Chinese may realize, and particularly if you think about this, the Chinese economy is in real trouble, in part because of the tariffs that Trump has imposed on them, but also because of their own mismanagement of the economy. So they're economically weak. And what do countries do when they're economically weak? The Chinese leaders tend to become extremely nationalist and play those cards. When President Xi gave that big speech about Taiwan, which was sort of saber-rattling, that was at a time when the economy was starting to go on a downturn, and people saw it for what it was, which is when you're weak at home, turn to saber rattling. We just had a long discussion in our episodes about the Soleimani strike in Iran, about how totalitarian regimes can misread strategic patience for weakness. And, when the United States didn't respond to a series of Iranian provocations, they thought they could get away with killing an American, and they miscalculated and got themselves into a lot of trouble. China is very capable of making a similar miscalculation, don't you think?
They are, for sure. And we've seen them, as we said, make one bad decision after another. The United States doesn't have a defense treaty with Taiwan. That's really the risk here. I think for a lot of people, particularly for Tsai's opponents and for people who are a little bit more cautious on China, both here and in Washington, the real problem is that they worry that if China decides to invade Taiwan, that the United States is basically going to turn around and go, really? Are we going to go to war with this giant military for the freedom of Taiwan? They worry that actually, if tested, the United States won't be there. And I got to say, Mark, if you look around this area, we have let China dominate the Pacific over the last decade without much pushback. The pushback's only just started. Mm-hmm. And so, I mean, I think that, especially to take a little bit of a devil's advocate side, there are people who warn that just poking at China, insisting that, that we're never going to be part of China is really risky for Taipei because, in fact, you just don't know 100% that the United States has your back. That's the experience that Saudi Arabia just had when Iran attacked. They thought Donald Trump had their back, but he didn't. Then Donald Trump changed his mind and ordered the killing of Qasem Soleimani, and we still don't really know what our policy is in the region. The Taiwanese are in pretty much the same position, only they're much, much weaker vis-a-vis this really, really powerful enemy in the People's Republic.
On the other hand, though, Dany, I mean, Donald Trump's policy, he's been the most pro-Taiwan president in our lifetime since Jimmy Carter broke relations. The Obama administration would only send 1 or 2 warships a year through the Taiwan Straits, which is the strait separating Taiwan from the mainland China. Trump is sending them at a pace of almost 1 a month, basically saying these are international waters, we're sailing through here, and nothing you can do about it, Beijing. He's been sending increased visits by 1- and 2-star generals. He recently, as you noted, approved a major arms sale. That included F-16 fighters, which is the first time we've sold F-16s to Taiwan since 1992, and that's a sale that the Obama administration turned down, that they didn't want to do because it was too provocative. And quite frankly, he became the first American president or president-elect at the time to speak with a elected leader of Taiwan when he accepted President Tsai's congratulatory call. And the Washington Post reported that wasn't a flub, that was intentional when they did that. So he's doing pretty good in terms of deterrence. But deterrence has to be maintained, as we've learned the hard way in the Middle East. And I hope that he does.
Yeah, listen, they love Donald Trump here. He may not be that popular at home, but he's pretty popular here. There's no question that Trump is the most sort of pro-Taiwan, most open to supporting Taiwan president we've had. Here's the risk. A, you can't count on Donald Trump. And B, does it stay that way? The one thing I'll say about that is a lot of Taiwan's fortune has nothing to do with Taiwan. A lot of Taiwan's fortune, just like Tsai Ing-wen, a lot of her victory didn't have as much to do with her as it did to do with China. People all over the world, the American leader, even some European leaders, the Australian leaders, everybody is sick and tired of China throwing its weight around. It has backfired massively. And that really, in terms of Trump, that's one of the reasons why you see his different attitude on Taiwan. It's like, hey, you Chinese, you think you can threaten? You think you can bully? No, you can't. We're not going to put up with it. So he's been part of that pushback. He's been part of that reaction. And as you rightly said, though, it hasn't caused any sort of a rethink in Beijing.
And I'll tell you one other thing that he's doing, which I think is going to have a major strategic impact, and it's one of my hobby horses that you tease me about, but I think it's really important, is the withdrawal from the INF Treaty. So our colleague Dan Blumenthal wrote a great piece in the Washington Post a couple of years ago about how basically we're at a disadvantage in the Asia Pacific because China, something like 95% of their missiles violate the INF Treaty, would violate the INF Treaty if they'd been a part of it. They have more short and medium range missiles. This is a treaty that bans short and medium range missiles that President Trump withdrew from. It was a treaty with Russia, and we were both held to it. Russia was cheating. We were not building them, and China was building these missiles. Before we withdrew from that and before we had the right to build these missiles, if we got into a scuffle with the Chinese or a conflict with China, our only deterrent was a nuclear ICBM, which they could call our bluff and say, you're not going to nuke us. Of course you're not. And so if we are able to deploy intermediate range missiles in Japan, in Guam, in bases in East Asia, we now have a conventional deterrent that didn't exist before. And I think the U.S. has started testing those missiles. I think it would send a very strong signal of support to Taiwan if we started deploying those. And we could do it tomorrow by just taking Tomahawk cruise missiles and putting them in Guam. But, we should be making clear to China that we have a conventional deterrent if you wanted to take some action against Taiwan.
But Donald Trump is such a zero-sum guy. Don't you worry that he's not willing to stand up to China as we think he is, and that everything is going to be hostage to this trade deal he's hoping to do?
Well, that's to some extent the genius of the Soleimani strike, right? That no one expected him to do that. And that took Iran by surprise. But you know what? North Korea is watching that. Beijing is watching that. Lots of other enemies are watching that. And so they don't know what Donald Trump will do, what he's capable of. And so in deterrence, your goal is to create doubt in the mind of the enemy as to whether or not you will impose the kind of consequences on them that they consider unacceptable. And I think in the wake of the Soleimani strike, I think that enhances our deterrent when it comes to China, too.
Yeah, you heard it here first, folks. Donald Trump, genius strategist.
Hey, well, you know who likes
you're-
you know who likes Donald Trump? The foreign minister of Taiwan.
Yeah, no, I know. So I sat down with Joseph Wu. He's an old friend to us and to AEI. We don't have formal diplomatic relations with Taiwan because it's not, China doesn't let Taiwan be treated as a country. So, but he was the head of their embassy, in quotes, in D.C. He was the national security advisor to President Tsai. And since 2018, he has been the foreign minister of the Republic of China. He was really nice to let me get back at you because I was out of town and you talked to Secretary of State Pompeo without me. And so, I had to get my own back. So I sat down by myself with Joseph on the day after the election. It was really kind of him to do that on a Sunday and on a big day in this country. And we had a great conversation.
Exclusive reporting on this podcast coming to you, listeners. Here we go.
Foreign Minister of Taiwan, Joseph Wu, thank you so much for joining the podcast. I'm really grateful.
It is my pleasure, Danny, and I love to do this. This is the first time for me, but I think it should be good.
It'll be great, and I have to tell you, you're helping me get revenge on my podcast co-host, Mark Thiessen, because he interviewed Secretary of State Pompeo a couple of weeks ago without me, and now I have a foreign minister all to myself. So I'm very grateful for that.
I'm very happy to be able to do this for you.
Thank you very much. So we're meeting on a pretty auspicious day. It's the day after the Taiwanese democratic elections. President Tsai Ing-wen of the Democratic Progressive Party won in a really landslide victory against her opponent from the Kuomintang, the main opposition party. Tell me what you think happened yesterday.
That was the seventh direct presidential election in Taiwan. The first one was in 1996. And in the previous 6 direct presidential elections, we had 3 peaceful turnovers of political power. So this is just another step of Taiwan's democracy. And Taiwan's democracy, every time there's a direct presidential election, it's always a very passionate moment for the country. I think it's also a very exciting moment for the electorate who are able to go to the voting booths. Just to show to the international community, Taiwan is a democracy, Taiwan is a mature democracy, and Taiwan will sustain its democracy.
It really was remarkable. We had a few colleagues and I had the opportunity to go to a polling station, and then we were at both the main party's headquarters last night as the election returns were coming in. I mean, people genuinely were thrilled out in the streets, out celebrating their opportunity to make their voice known. Tell me what you think, though, it means. I understand that it means a lot for Taiwan's democracy, but what does President Tsai's victory mean? Why do you think that she won, and why do you think she won so solidly? Almost 8 million votes, almost a 20-point margin against her opponent.
In fact, it's more than 8 million votes. It's 8 million plus 170,000 votes. So it's a tremendous victory for the president. And this is the largest number of votes any president can ever have in Taiwan's direct presidential election. One thing that I think is quite unique in this particular election that is different from any of the previous elections, that shows not only the success of the president, but that also shows the maturity of this democracy. The turnout of the young people, the young voters, is tremendous this time. It used to be the case that the age cohort of 20 to 29 is the most vocal. Some of them are very vocal in politics, but turnout in the election happens to be the lowest, maybe 30%, 40%. But this time around, is probably more than 70% for this age cohort to turn out and vote.
That's amazing.
That's
as
really
an
amazing.
American, I have to say I'm pretty jealous of you. We don't see numbers like that anymore at all. But what's interesting here is young people also voted pretty overwhelmingly for President Tsai.
Mm-hmm.
And what I want to understand a little better, because I think it's really interesting for folks in the United States, is 6 months ago, 8 months ago, President Tsai was trailing in the polls. Many people thought that she was not going to win re-election. Mm-hmm. She turned it around, and she turned it around in a very big way. If you had to talk about the number one factor, what would that be?
I'm not sure I'm able to tell you what the number one factors is, and I don't work for the campaign headquarters anymore, so it's hard for me to answer that question. But I do know there are several factors playing at the same time. Maybe Hong Kong factor is very important in this election. One of the reasons why the young voters here in Taiwan, they want to turn out and vote because they see the demonstrations in Hong Kong. They see the young demonstrators in Hong Kong fighting for their freedom and democracy. And the young voters here in Taiwan, they're very concerned that might happen to Taiwan in the future. They're saying to themselves, if they don't come out and vote, if they don't come out and try to safeguard the country by going through the democratic process, Taiwan might become a second Hong Kong. And that is exactly what they don't want to see in the future. The second factor is the international trade situation. Compared to Singapore, Hong Kong, China, or other countries who are experiencing stagnation or not growing or growth in the negative territory, Taiwan's economic situation is rather good. And the opposition cannot use the economy as a campaign issue to get at the government. And the government is telling the public, saying that, hey, compared to other Asian four tigers, Taiwan is doing rather well. And Taiwan is able to capitalize on the trade dispute in between the United States and China by attracting the Taiwanese investors in China to come back to Taiwan and invest. And that helps our economy as well. Another factor, and this is something that within my own jurisdiction, our international relations. Even though Taiwan's relations with diplomatic allies is an issue that the opposition is trying to attack us. We lost some diplomatic allies in the last few years. But look at our relations with the United States, with Europe, with Japan, with other like-minded countries.
Right. So let's talk a little bit about the global environment. It's pretty interesting to have seen over the past few years. There really has been a change in global attitudes about the People's Republic of China, where I think there had once been a lot more optimism about Chinese economic changes actually leading to some good political changes. Mm-hmm. That optimism, I think, has largely gone away, and that is that's a shame. I mean, frankly, I think for all of us, I think for Taiwan as well, we've all hoped to see China actually transform in a positive rather than in a negative direction. But it was interesting to me to see that that one of the rallying cries of President Tsai was no to one country, two systems.
Exactly.
That has been the system under which Hong Kong has operated since the British returned Hong Kong territory to Chinese sovereignty. Why is that such a big rallying cry here? No to one country, two systems.
When Hong Kong was returned to China, this is a longer answer to this very important question. When Hong Kong was returned to China, the Chinese created this one country, two system model to rule over Hong Kong. And they want to use the Hong Kong model as an attraction to the Taiwanese voters or the Taiwanese public so that Taiwan and China can unify someday under the one country, two system model. They think that the one country, two system model is a model to unify the whole China. But over these years, the people are seeing the one country, two system model in Hong Kong. Freedom gets eroded, especially the freedom of speech, freedom of press, and rule of law is getting eroded, and the early promise of a democracy, like direct election for the legislative council or for the administrative chief, is not going to be realized anymore. And the court processes might get overturned by the Chinese People's Congress. So all this are negative development of what people in Taiwan want to see. So one country, two system model already has a bad reputation in Taiwan. When we do the public opinion survey in Taiwan, asking the people whether they would like to have one country, two system model in Taiwan, the rejection rate used to be somewhere around 70 to 75%. And after January 2nd last year, Xi Jinping just made it very loudly that Taiwan and China should unify at some point based on 1982 consensus and one country, one China principle, and use one country, two system as a formulation for the future unification. And people wake up all of a sudden and say, hey, look at what happened in Hong Kong, and now you want to impose the same system on Taiwan. And President was very clear, non-ambiguous to say that this is not what we want. And
not what she wants, not what you want, and clearly not what young Taiwanese people want.
Exactly.
Who think of themselves, you talk about the polling,
yeah.
It's really fascinating to see that younger people in Taiwan increasingly don't think of themselves as Chinese.
Exactly.
They think of themselves as Taiwanese.
Exactly. And especially after the demonstration in Hong Kong, June last year, police clashes with the demonstrators, and the police got very violent. Sometimes they would use lethal weapons to go against the demonstrators, and the young people here just have so much sympathy for the Hong Kong people who are inspired to pursue freedom and democracy. And listen to those Hong Kong people. They are also shouting at Taiwan and say that don't become something like us in the future. So it is very important for you young people in Taiwan to vote for somebody who is able to safeguard your democracy. And just not long ago, I think it was about 1 month ago, we did a public opinion survey asking people, do you like one country, two system model? The rejection rate goes up to 89.3%. It's a national consensus
amazing.
That we don't want it.
So one of the things that I looked at this morning after the election was the Chinese, the People's Republic of China reaction. Xinhua, which is one of the Chinese news agency, the official Chinese news agency.
The reason why I'm laughing at because I was just reading it a minute ago before I came in over here.
So I'm going to quote this because I want to hear what you have to say. As people of insight, Xinhua writes, as people of insight and the media on the island have said, this is obviously not a normal election. Tsai and the DPP used dirty tactics such as cheating, repression, and intimidation to get votes, fully exposing their selfish, greedy, and evil nature. That sounds a little hysterical to me. So the Chinese, I think that the Chinese were pretty enthusiastic about the idea that the election was going to go against President Tsai. What is the argument that they make?
It only shows that they don't know how to read Taiwan's democracy or Taiwan's election in a correct way. And their argument is so different from the rest of the world. And there's only one explanation. That is because they don't have freedom. They don't have democracy in China. There's no free election in China. And they don't know how to read the results of a free election. Even the opposition are not complaining about those kinds of activities that the report is claiming. And I think we need to tell the Chinese a more accurate story in Taiwan's democracy. Not just for Taiwan to be able to speak about it, but for the international community to speak more about it, and also for the international community to try to convince the Chinese that this democracy is good for the country. and China should try it as well. It might be a very hard sell for the authoritarian Chinese Communist government at this moment, but if Taiwan becomes more successful in the future, either in making international friendship networks or its economy, and being recognized more by international community as a very successful democracy, as a force for good, as a reliable partner, I think that might be a way to persuade the Chinese that they should go for democracy themselves at some point.
Well, I certainly hope so. One of my colleagues, Oriana Scalar-Mastro, wrote about the elections for the LA Times, and she expressed some concern based on her discussions with Chinese military officials and senior Chinese Communist Party officials that China is not interested in tolerating merely the status quo, that in fact there is some thinking going on in Beijing about potential military action. Critics of President Tsai and of the DPP say that the opposition party has built a more peaceful relationship across the strait, that there's more dialogue, that there's more openness, and that therefore the Beijing government feels less threatened by the potential of Taiwanese independence. First of all, what do you think about the threat from China? How real is it? How seriously? And obviously you're a foreign minister, not a defense minister, so you can keep it in that lane. But also, what do you think about the criticism that the DPP has neglected to nurture that cross-strait relationship?
Need to come back to the very basics of, first, the reality on the ground. Second, the bottom line of the DPP policy toward China. On the first aspect, if you look at the reality in Taiwan, we have a free, direct presidential election for the president, for the parliament already. And you are here to observe our election. You know that Taiwan is a genuine democracy. And you are now sitting in the Ministry of Foreign Affairs, and we issue passport, we issue visa. We're functioning like a Ministry of Foreign Affairs across the world. And when you are here in Taiwan, you use our NT notes rather than using RMB that is used in China. And also tell you the reality that the PRC never for any one single moment had any jurisdiction over Taiwan. So the reality is that Taiwan is not under China's jurisdiction. We have our own central government running this country. So this is a fact. And this is the reality of the status quo across the Taiwan Strait. And the second aspect that I would like to emphasize on is that ever since President Tsai was running for the first presidential election back in 2016, she already made her position very well known throughout Washington, D.C. or throughout the rest of the world that she is not about to provoke China. She was about to establish a cross-strait relations that is stable, predictable, and sustainable. And she has been holding on to those positions. And her basic policy toward China is that we want to maintain a status quo. And if the status quo can be maintained, we'll continue to extend our goodwills to China so there can be negotiations, consultations, businesses, exchanges, and all that, so that we can have a peaceful and stable environment in this part of the world. And that's her policy. Her policy hasn't changed. And if you listen to my rhetorics during these few days, all the president's statements last night.
She said, I actually wrote it down, she expressed herself on that topic. She said, non-provocative, non-adventurous attitude toward the People's Republic. So,
that's right.
I mean, Xi Jinping last year, in his New Year's speech, said it wasn't enough to maintain the status quo about Taiwan. He wanted progress. Now,
yes.
Progress from Beijing is not necessarily what we think.
That's right, exactly.
We think is progress, but that's still worrying rhetoric. Are you worried? Or
Yes. Yes, we are worrying because the Chinese wanted to impose political conditions on Taiwan. They made it very clear and made it more alarming since Xi Jinping's statement on January 2nd last year. He said in a very clear way that if unification with Taiwan is not making any progress, they would reserve the use of force against Taiwan. And that has become something that we look at very seriously. And that is also something that the people here in Taiwan do not enjoy. And we want to tell the Chinese that, yes, we want to speak with you for high-level meetings, for any kind of consultation with each other, or for quiet discussions with each other on some of the sensitive issues, that should be done without political precondition. And, political precondition in the eyes of China is something like one China principle or one country, two system model for the future unification. Yeah. But if you examine those preconditions very carefully, they are the pre-conclusions of whatever can be the results of any discussion. That's the Chinese negotiation tactics. You have to accept that, before the negotiation starts. And if you don't accept that, I will have force against you so that you will gradually accept the political preconditions to start the talk. But once you start accepting the political preconditions, you end up with a situation that you give up the most precious you have. One China principle means Taiwan is part of China. And that's not what the people here want. And one country, two system model is a model of unification that's being rejected by the Taiwanese people. So, when the Chinese are saying that there's a lack of progress and they want to use force against Taiwan, I think the international community should tell China instead that they are putting up very difficult situations and they are using the wrong way against a fellow democracy. They should listen very carefully on what Taiwanese people are saying. By the same token, they should also listen very carefully on what the Hong Kong people are saying after the local council election last year.
One of the things you think about is your relationship with the United States. Donald Trump has, I've got a lot of criticism for the president. I don't expect you to nod your head even, but Donald Trump has changed the way America talks to both Beijing and Taipei. Mm-hmm. And that has been, I think, something that has been received with a lot of happiness here. When we've talked previously, you talked a little bit about the relationship with the United States as being kind of a new normal. Better access, more communication. I saw that Secretary of State Pompeo put out a very warm congratulatory note on Taiwanese elections. In years past, that has not necessarily been the case.
That's right.
A lot of deliberation, a lot of caution, a lot of concern about offending Beijing. That wasn't the case this time. Do you think, and you've been too generous with your time, so I won't keep you much longer. Is that the new normal? Do you think that that's going to be the way it is going forward with Washington? And how much confidence do you have in Washington as you look at the challenges from Beijing?
I have a lot of confidence in Washington. I also have a lot of confidence in the Tsai administration in Taiwan. One of the reasons why we'll continue to make progress in our relations with the United States, on the one hand, we have so many friends in the Trump administration, it's either in the White House or in National Security Council, State Department, Defense Department. And we also have friends across the board in the Washington, D.C.'s policy communities. And if you look at the Congress, we have friends on both sides of the aisle. So this is a situation that we feel very comfortable. We get wide support in Washington, D.C. And Trump administration especially. All those friends in the administration, whether they are in the White House, in National Security Council, in the State Department, they are willing to try new things. They are willing to upgrade the relations. They are willing to send more people to Taiwan. They are willing to sell Taiwan arms that previously, is not a possibility for Taiwan. So that's the part of Washington, D.C. that we appreciate very much.
You're our second largest military customer after Saudi Arabia.
Exactly.
It's a statistic that absolutely boggles the mind if you think about this small country.
That's right.
That's all. It's important that the administration is willing to share with you the means to defend yourself. We've been talking about this for years because I've known you since before you were the foreign minister. Okay, is this going to be the year for a free trade agreement with Washington?
I certainly hope so.
We've got an agreement, or at least a preliminary agreement with Beijing about some new ground rules for trade. How easy will it be to get a free trade agreement with Taiwan, do you think?
It might not be that easy. We have been trying to get the USTR to start the FTA negotiations with Taiwan for quite some time, ever since I was in Washington, D.C. as a Taiwan's rep in 2007, 2008. And we haven't been making any real progress on this issue. So it may not be that easy, but I think, this is...
But you have free trade agreements with, you have one with New Zealand, you have
Singapore.
them... You have several that,
Yeah, several.
and it has not been. It's not been a source of tension with Beijing. These FTAs.
No, but since it is in Taiwan's strategic interest to have an FTA with the United States, so we'll continue to pursue that. Dependence on China as a single largest market for us might not be in our best interest.
Diversity is important.
Exactly. Every economist in the world would tell us that, and we know that. So we want to diversify. And the best country, the best market for Taiwan will be the United States. So it's in our strategic interest. And for the United States, I think having an FTA with Taiwan can also be very important. Taiwan is always a loyal customer of the United States.
Not just a loyal customer. We sat down with the Chamber of Commerce here, and it was really interesting to hear them talking about, intellectual property protections, about the kind of standards that we're looking for here, regulatory ability, Taiwan semiconductors, and how important they are. So, I mean, there's a lot that Taiwan has to offer, I guess. It's interesting to see that. Let me put it this way: I'm hopeful that Washington will make some progress on this in the coming year. It'd be it would be a good thing for the Trump administration to do, and for Congress to support.
Yes. And if we have an FTA, I'm sure it's going to encourage Taiwanese businessmen to make investment in the United States, which will benefit U.S. In the area of employment or economic growth, things like that. And it's in your interest as well.
Music to Donald Trump's ears, I'm sure. You've been super generous. Congratulations, really. Not congratulations on the DPP's victory. Not congratulations on President Tsai's victory. Congratulations on having a free and democratic election. It is a great thing.
Thank you very much. We are being praised by the U.S. friends, especially the Trump administration, as a democratic success story, as a reliable partner, and as a force for good in the world. We'll continue to shine as a democratic success story, and we'll continue to work with the United States as a reliable partner, and we'll continue to work with the like-minded countries to make sure that Taiwan is a force for good in the world. Thank you very much for speaking with me, Dany.
Amen to all of that. Thank you, Joseph, truly.
Thank you.
Dany, you did a great job. That was a fantastic interview. Great get. And a historic day in Taiwan. What was your main takeaway from your discussion with the foreign minister?
I think the main takeaway is actually that Taiwan, Taiwan is coming into its own. And, they have no desire to piss off China. They have no desire to declare independence tomorrow. But bottom line, it's totally generic. Democracy is better than dictatorship. People like
You heard it here
democracy.
first, people. You heard it here first. We're pro-democracy here at What the Hell is Going On?
Listen, I know that it sounds obvious, but 1.4 billion people are living across the Taiwan Strait, living under a Communist Party dictatorship, and I think that there's been a debate here. Taiwan was a dictatorship as well. It was an authoritarian regime until the 1990s when they had their first free elections. And what's absolutely clear in polling and from this election is that not only do the Taiwanese people like living in freedom, like living in a place where they can choose their own leaders, they also think of themselves as Taiwanese people. They don't think of themselves as Chinese. That's bad news for the People's Republic of China. And you know what? The tide of history is against the People's Republic.
Well, you know what? That sort of happened here in our country once. We sort of started thinking of ourselves as not British and started thinking of ourselves as American. And I think that same phenomenon is happening in Taiwan, where you've got a whole generation that's grown up now that, never even considered, for many years under the nationalists, on the Kuomintang, which we came into power under Chiang Kai-shek, the reason the country is called the Republic of China is because it considered itself for years the legitimate government of all of China. It was just on Taiwan. And the communists People's Republic of China has never had sovereignty over Taiwan. And so there was a dispute over who was one China, right? And there's a whole generation for whom that's like an esoteric historical debate. They're Taiwan. They're not the Republic of China. They're not the People's Republic of China. They're Taiwanese, and that's the fault of Beijing for its authoritarian bullying.
it is the fault of Beijing, and President Tsai can look over at Beijing and say, thank you to Xi Jinping. And what's really interesting, and people don't want to hear all of the gritty details about the elections in Taiwan, but what's really interesting is they have a separate race for the presidency and for their legislative yuan, which is their parliament, their Congress. She outperformed her party by several million votes. Okay. So a lot of this is about her and about how she's managed, about how she stood up to the People's Republic, and about how she really forthrightly said no to one country, two systems. China could reassure Taiwan. China could help the Kuomintang back into power. It's not like people rejected them. Tsai's party lost seats in the legislative yuan. They still got a majority, but it's a much, much slimmer majority now. China could manage this just like China could manage Hong Kong so much better if they just stepped back, suddenly realized that doing everything at the point of a gun, at the end of a truncheon, might work a little better.
No doubt. But this is the problem with all dictatorships, is that they don't have the ability to think that way. And on top of that, there's nobody within the Chinese, increasingly authoritarian within the Communist Party system, because there's a cult of Xi Jinping right now that is willing to go and say, you know what, you might be responsible for this. You think maybe you ought to change your policy. You think there's a guy brave enough to walk into the president's office and say that to Xi Jinping?
Obviously, there isn't. And, the right lesson for him is to look around. Look at the message Taiwan sent you. Look at the message you're getting from Hong Kong. Look at the message the Iranian people are sending to Ayatollah Khamenei and the Islamic Republic. Look at what happened to the Soviet Union and ask yourself, can it never, ever happen here? I loved what Joseph Wu said about China. He said they should try elections, too.
Well, that's a good note to end on, Dany. Great job, getting that interview, and we're looking forward to having you back here live for the next podcast.
I can't wait to be there. I really miss home. Take care, Mark. Thanks, Alexa.
Thanks for listening, folks.
And our team here at AEI is Alexa Santry, Matt Weinset, Jen Moretta, and Macy Heath.
Let us know what topics you'd like us to cover. You can get in touch with the show by emailing us at whatthehell@aei.org.
Or you can reach us on Twitter. I'm at @dpletka.
And I'm at Mark Thiessen. That's Mark with a C.
Please rate and review the podcast. If you like the show, please subscribe, share it, comment on Apple Podcasts, or wherever you're listening to this.
Thanks for listening.